Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages. I'm Chris Ward, and this is the CBT Nugget series for ITIL Foundations. Today's nugget is looking at service asset and configuration management. Anytime I hear the word asset, of course, I kind of like those James Bond movies and the spy movies where they always talk about activating the asset to make sure that they're able to take out the assassination attempt or do some sort of type spy thing. And so anytime I hear this, I'm always thinking about activating the assets. But what our assets are and what we use them for as part of our service transition, that's what this nugget is all about. To roll out things, we definitely need to make sure we know what is in existence. So we've done the planning for our transition. We know about change management. We know about our knowledge resources, the information that we need. But what about service asset and configuration management, where we need to know what our IT department has in place, what servers and printers and network capabilities and bandwidth and all kinds of things that will help us deliver that new service into the operations phase. If we think to our Acme Coffee example, and remember in the couple of past nuggets I talked about maybe that James and Jeremy want to be able to have a wine bar now along with the coffee bar. Well, there are certain things that are going to be assets that they currently have that they can use to help get that service up and running. Things like the point of sale, right? The POS system. Well, obviously going to be charging something. We already have that in place with the coffee. Maybe certain types of cups or glasses. Well, we have that. Or a supplier that's going to give us those delivery items. Got that in place. And we need to know that we have the capabilities, a kitchen, a dishwasher to wash the dishes. We need to have people, staff that are able and knowledgeable about things. These are all going to be assets. And how you configure those assets. In the case of training your people on wine as well as coffee, well, that is a configuration of a person in a nutshell. So there's a lot of things that need to be in place to help in the transition area. So service asset and configuration management, or SACM, I've heard some people even call it SACM, because it looks like it if you do it this way, where it's SACM for service asset and configuration management. Just depends on how people like to do their acronyms. But anyway, it's all about making sure that the assets required to deliver those services are not only controlled, but the accurate and reliable information about those assets is available when and where it's needed. That's straight from the service transition book itself. So we need to know these things. Now, there are some terms that we do need to know right off the bat. Service asset, because we're talking about service asset and configuration management. A service asset is any resource or capability of a service provider, right? That's the thing that you have as a service provider. That can be your laptops, that can be your servers, that can be your network, that can be your software. It's not just hardware. We can do that. Then we break that down into configuration items. Configuration items, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next whiteboard, but basically any component or service asset that needs to be managed in order to deliver a service. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then those configuration items will have attributes, and attributes are basically pieces of information. It could be the hard drive space, how much something costs, a version number of a software. Those are going to be important as well. CI types, configuration item types. These are going to be ways that you classify your configuration items. We typically think about it as hardware, software, maybe documents, maybe personnel. That could be a way for you to look at it. Components are going to be the term that means something that could be any smaller piece of a larger environment. Like our unified communication system would be a configuration item, right? But there could be components like our Skype for Business or Link client. That can mean the phones. Those are components that are made up of a larger configuration item, and then you can break it down into smaller pieces, parts, and that's what components are. Configuration baseline is going to be where your configuration has been set and agreed upon through change management, and then if you need to make any changes, this is where you start, and if you need to roll back in remediation, remember that, then you can always come back to the configuration baseline. Then the CMDB, which is the configuration management database, which then of course pumps into the configuration management system. We talked about that in the previous nugget. Then there are relationships. Relationships is some sort of connection between two of your configuration items, typically used in business relationship management, like your service provider and the business you're working for. This is going to be something like, well, obviously an application has a relationship with the server that it's running on. So we can see that in place. Or that server, in order to connect to the network, must use the wireless access point. So there's a relationship. And then finally, there is verification and audit, which we'll talk a little bit about under the process of service asset and configuration management. And this is where you make sure that all the information in the configuration management system is up to date and accurate. And you also make sure that all those items that you have been identified, they've been tagged, they've been put in. So verification will be those checks that you use to say, all right, have we made sure that we know about all of the items that we have and that we have them in the system? And then an audit is going to be a formalized check. That's where the IT manager, the CTO, and all those guys get together. They check everything and make sure. I know it's hard and it's boring sometimes, but it's a way to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. As part of the CMS system, remember, we have the CMDB, the Configuration Management Database. And so just to make sure we are all on the same page and understand what is a configuration item and not. So the CI is a configuration item. And within that, you are going to have the scope of the configuration items that are under your control. So any components that are out of scope are not under the control of your change management system or anything like that. That's going to be something different. For example, in my network diagram that I have here, here's a typical maybe medium to small business that is operating a few things. I've got SharePoint running. I've got Link, now Skype for Business. I probably should get the new icon out here. And there are going to be certain components that are under our scope. The radio tower that is used to provide internet connectivity, because we're out in the boondocks, is not under our scope. That's not something that we can control. However, there's a relationship with our wireless access points that we have here. And then, of course, I'm utilizing an IP PBX to access the public switch telephone network that is going to be used by my unified communication system that I have in place. Well, guess what? This is owned by the service provider. I obviously have to connect to it. So there is what we would call, and this is important, there is a relationship, right? There's a relationship between something that is out of scope and something that is in scope. We also see that there are, obviously in our configuration items, there's hardware. We got servers here, got a router, got some printers here. We also have software. We got SharePoint. We've got Skype for Business in place right here. We have networking infrastructure here where we've got maybe some wired connections. We've got some wireless connections. Those are all under the configuration item scope, the CI scope. And so at a data level, you are going to take all of this information and feed it into your configuration management database as configuration items. And then those will all be a part of your change management system, which is going to obviously use your configuration management system, which obviously has your CMDB. So that is pretty much what we're looking at. Now, don't forget attributes. Attributes would be things like on this printer, obviously you'd have your serial number. You would have your capabilities, like this is a laser printer versus like an inkjet printer. You might even have a location where this is. That's on the first floor. You know, this is the second floor. All right. And those are things that are also incorporated as part of the CMDB. When you look in the ITIL service strategy book, they talk about the activities that take place as part of service asset and configuration management. And obviously, the first thing that we're going to take a look at in this is going to be planning. Notice there aren't any arrows in this. Now, technically, you could say, well, planning comes first, then identification, but verification and audit takes place constantly. Status accounting, it takes place constantly. And so there isn't really an order to this. They all kind of work together and flow together. Planning is where we're going to define our objectives and processes and procedures. This is where we're going to identify the scope, right, of what it is that we are going to use for our configuration items. And this is going to be where your staff, your stakeholders, everybody is going to be a part of this. This is also where you're going to use your naming conventions and your types. This is where you're going to say, all right, we're going to have hardware, software, and the kitchen sink, okay, whatever the types of configuration items that you are going to use. Identification is where you go through and start doing, I would say, an inventory, right? So now that you have everything established as planning, identification is where we're going to say these are where you have your hardware systems, your software systems. You're going to identify what is going to be recorded for your databases, your configuration baselines, documentation for your software releases. That all takes place here, and like to say, an identification or like an inventory that takes place. Then we take a look at control. This is where you are placing all the information in the CMDB, and you want to make sure that if any modification needs to take place, only authorized and identified CIs are going to be put in, and only authorized people can then come in and obviously make changes to the configuration item. So any updating of the records, any of that kind of stuff must happen, and this is where change management, okay, change management is going to come in. That's an E, by the way. Change management is going to come in and help with that in our CMDB. Status accounting is literally where everything is reported. So your reporting comes out of this, and that could be a weekly reporting, that could be a monthly reporting, depending on obviously how long your transition plan is going to be. But even after the transition takes place, you're going to find that your service asset and configuration management is going to also be utilized in operations and even in continual service improvement, right? And so status accounting is all about that. What are your latest software item versions? Who takes care of all status change updates? Those kind of things. And then finally, there is verification and audit, which we've already mentioned. This makes sure that the items that we have are recorded. In other words, do we have them recorded? And we can say check. Are they up to date? Check. And have any changes been made that we are unaware of? So unapproved changes? Nope. Okay, good. So the verification has happened. The audit, maybe it's a more formalized thing where one of your senior management or people come in and sign on for that. Then, you can say, yep, okay, this is an official audit. Everything's good in our service asset and configuration, our SACM entire environment, okay? So we took a look at service asset and configuration management. We talked a little bit more about the CMDB configuration items. Remember what CIs are and how attributes, relationships, all that works together. And all, of course, the activities that go into making sure your CMDB is up to speed. It's been a great time with you today in this nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.